The mass movement changes as the 60s progress. There's a lot of direct action in the first 4 years, but as Vietnam starts heating up, a lot of students, young people, break away from SNCC and get involved in the anti-war movement. So you see more movements happening, this sort of decade of mass movements and youth activity increases. So you see the population of activists changing a little bit. Also, with more federal laws in place, the Civil Rights Act is passed in 1964, and in 1965, the Voting Rights Act, the goalposts change. So there's a sense in which the mass movement dies down a little bit because these laws are now in place. And what you find are a lot of activists, particularly at the local level, interested in economic justice. And it's not like for the first time they notice that there are poor people, but they notice that these other laws are not worth anything. Like if you can't afford to buy a hamburger, being able to sit at the lunch counter, it doesn't mean anything. If you can't afford to give clothing, put adequate clothing on your children, sending them to school is the second step. So you have to have that first step first. So the goals start changing to make sure that's happening. So there's more economic justice and more access to healthcare and to federal funding and resources. Johnson's War on Poverty helps in that regard because he's creating systems, community action programs that allows local people to organize in this way. And you do see many new groups emerging around economic justice and the community action programs. Martin Luther King starts shifting more visibly. I think he was always interested in economic justice. His March on Washington speech talks about economic justice. We just choose not to listen to that part of the speech. But he goes to Chicago in 1965 to try and promote economic justice, try and promote all the things he had worked for in the South and export that to the northern city. We don't get to hear much about that in general history classes. He creates this Poor People's Campaign, which is specifically about economic justice. So from 1965 to the end of his life, that's his focus. The population is changing. You have young Black people in the South becoming very frustrated by the speed, the lack of speed that these changes are occurring under. It's just way too slow for them. And they also see the need that Black people need to organize themselves more effectively, and SNCC starts splitting apart. As this Black empowerment develops, it is read as Black Power because Stokely Carmichael comes out in 1966 on a march in Greenwood, Mississippi, and utters the words Black Power, which is a great slogan, but always misunderstood and always labeled as a Black nationalist, anti-white movement, which it isn't. It's more about Black empowerment and Black self-definition. And it's also something that can be defined very broadly.